everyone. We're back again with the music chat, and today we're going to be talking about primarily Charles Wesley, but also his brother John, the two brothers that founded Methodism. And we are going to talk about Charles in particular because he was the hymn writer of the two. Although John did write some hymns too, but John was the prolific of the two brothers. And they had a great history, and we in the Protestant, many Protestant faiths are all familiar with the many hymns of Charles Wesley. And so Barbara's going to start off by telling us a little bit about how the Wesley brothers started out.
Right, and they were born in England. I have to read it because I don't know their Staffordshires very well. Epsworth, Lincolnshire in Great Britain. And we're talking about a long time ago. He was born in 1707 in Great Britain. And his parents were also scholars. His father was a vicar in the Church of England, and his mother was his first teacher. His father also was a poet and wrote lots of things as well, so I think that's probably where he was at least exposed to that idea. He first went to the Westminster School and then ended up at Oxford. I think that they both ended up at Oxford, and he ended up getting a master's degree there. So we're talking about someone who was well educated,
Right.
And classically.
It seemed like education was a value
Yes.
too in the family.
Yes, and classically educated.
Mhm.
I mean, so
Right.
the religious education that he got was a very classical study, as I can glean from what I've read.
Me too. Right.
But while he and his brother John were at Oxford, oh, and I meant to say, his mother and father had 20 children. 19
maybe?
19 children, yes. He was the 18th. John was the 19th, I believe.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you because I saw that Charles was 18. I was going to ask you which one was John.
Yeah.
So he was actually the younger brother.
Yes,
Okay.
and but only 10 of them survived. So it was the way of the times, you
Yeah.
know. But he, while they were at Oxford, they started this group of other students who were interested in the same thing, in biblical study, and it was called the Holy Club. And they would meet once a week or whatever. They would have communion once a week. That was a big thing for them. They would have study. They would rise early. It was a very methodical study for them, very much so. And pretty soon the people around them, their other fellow students, started to call them Methodists. And so that's where that name comes from the rigor of a schedule, from discipline, from the method that they pursued their studies. And from there, it just kind of grew. They were influenced by many different people along the way. Peter Bowler was a Moravian cleric type person and in London, and actually he was the one that helped Charles see what the real truth was for him. But before that happened, we're talking about the early 1700s. After Charles and John received their education, they were sent by Oglethorpe to go to Georgia.
And Oglethorpe, I believe, was the second governor of Georgia.
He was the governor of Georgia at that time. And they were sent over there, John to be the cleric person, minister I call him, but vicar type person. And Charles was actually in charge of Indian affairs, foreign affairs, something like that. Well, they left for that in 1736. So we're still talking, before the Revolution, early colonial times.
Right.
And the Native Americans kind of gave them a hard time. The settlers there kind of gave them a hard time.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And they were very English, and I think there's a lot of rebellion against trying to get away from those tenets, at that time. So they stayed for a year and went back to England. They were very happy to do that. Yeah. and it was not good for their health and that sort of stuff.
Right.
So eventually, Charles's personal life is pretty normal. He married, he had children, whatever. But his conversion is the big thing with him. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned that they had been in the United States. They came back to England, and he had a bout of pleurisy. He was very ill.
Was it pleurisy? I knew he was ill. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah. And he had already made this connection with Peter Bowler because he was teaching him how to speak English. Because he was from Arabia, so he was, I guess it was German, probably Arabian or whatever. And so he had already had that connection, and Peter Bowler was the one who said, Charles, you need to really search your soul. You need to really think about what Christ means to you in your soul. Because obviously he was having doubts, he was sick, he had been over to America and had a bad experience, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So Peter Bowler encouraged him to do that, and he did. He started praying and reading the Bible, and another influence were his friends that were also part of this group that came to pray with him and to talk with him. And he actually, because of all that, had a conversion.
Yeah, I read where one of the accounts I read said they came and ministered to him basically, and he sort of drifted off to sleep, and sort of kind of had one of those experiences of feeling like voices spoke to him, and when he awoke, he was all in. He just really felt like that was a signal for him to give over his life.
That's right.
And do right by Christ.
That's right. Yeah. And they actually have a plaque in London outside of the church where they say his conversion happened. So it's very important. And I think, of course, as far as the Methodist Methodist Church, of course, they are very important to the Methodist Church because they founded it. But the thing that was a major difference from the way they had been classically trained is that he and his brother went out to the common folk. They went to prisons. They went to the slums. They went everywhere because they felt so strongly about trying to teach the ways of Christ to these people. And so they, in a way, that was pulling away from the Church of England, who always had the high guys in front, and it was always those are the ones that know everything. You're just sitting here listening to it, So their whole thing was to get everyone involved.
Yeah, that everyone should study for themselves.
Yes, and it was accessible to everyone.
And it's sort of in line with what we talked a couple of chats ago about music had at one time been, church music was done by
the professionals. Right.
And the common congregation didn't participate much. And so it's much more in line with that concept of bringing it down to earth to the middle classes and the masses, the masses of people, to see that they too have minds and can study and can make decisions for themselves. What a gift.
Absolutely.
What a gift.
And I think that's pretty much a tenet of the Methodist Church, that along with grace comes study and comes a routine of
seeking,
being holy,
knowledge, seeking knowledge,
setting things aside.
Right.
And I think we all kind of do that. But we talked about how. He was also inspired by Luther's teachings as well. So there's a lot of commonality there.
Right.
I believe that it's kind of as far as the order of worship, The Lutheran Church is a little bit different as far as that goes, but I believe the bottom line is the same. I think we're all seeking the same thing. Yeah.
Well, all the time that the brothers were sharing their thoughts and ministry to others, Charles was a poet.
Yes.
And he wrote thousands of hymns.
Thousands.
And not only did he write thousands of hymns, we've seen anywhere from 6,000 to 9,000 hymns. It's not even consistent when you look it up.
Right.
No one can even agree on how many there actually are. What was I going to say about that?
Well, he wrote so many, and
oh, I know what it was.
All through the
not only did he have quantity, but they say these were really good pieces of poetry.
Yes.
And even though he wrote more than 2 a week, they estimate at least 2 a week. They were all, there were so many that were so right on, that were such quality. And that's maybe different from when we think of a lot of hymn writers as having large outputs. Maybe they were just hurriedly getting something out for that Sunday or whatever.
Right.
But he was so always thinking, and he was always studying, and things were always having meaning to him. And it was said that, his body of hymns is the most complete work of all of Christianity, all the different aspects of Christian life. And some of I have one of the writings here says some of the places that he was inspired by was his conversion, which we're going to talk a little bit more about the hymn that we're going to talk about. These are all things in his life that inspired different hymns and poems. His marriage, things that he had seen, the death of his friends, public events like there was an earthquake panic that happened, rumors of an invasion from France, the defeat of Prince Charles Edward at Culloden, the Gordon riots. So these were all major events of his time, and also all the festivals of the Christian faith. They say that his hymns can be classified throughout the Christian experience. They classify them as Christian experience, invitation hymns, sanctification hymns, funeral hymns, and hymns of love. Hymns of love was one of the big things. Even love is in some of the titles,
what's it?
that we have.
Love divine, all love's
Yeah, that was him. Yes.
I know. Very real and beautifully
Right.
put. And of course they were harmonized by many different people.
Right.
And the melodies were from many different people.
That's it.
But he had such a strong spiritual faith, I believe, that it really, it's said that John is remembered as the leader in Methodism, but
because he was more seen as the preacher, I think, of the two.
But it was Charles whose hymns helped everyone to believe what John was saying.
Right.
So.
And yet Charles did a lot of preaching himself, and John wrote music. So they both were kind of, they were both doing writing and preaching, but one sort of excelled in this side and the other excelled in the other.
Well, because they would have these Methodist meetings, and as I said, they went out away from the building and preached to many people, and so he would write a lot of hymns for these meetings. And
also, I think that Charles's health was not such that at one point he stopped traveling.
That's right.
And so John was still able to go and share outwardly out in the countrysides and places where Charles gave that up at one point.
And they also sent people over to America after they went back to London to try. They were preachers. They mentioned John Coke and Francis Asbury, but they were preachers on horseback who traveled from town to town to talk about the Holy Spirit and talk about God and the Bible and so forth. And so many little groups of Methodists started to pop up, and they say there are two. There's a first awakening and a second awakening. And I'm still trying to figure all that out, but I assume, I don't, you know what they say about assume, but I think the first awakening was around the revolutionary time, when people were being told. And then the second one, I think, was after the Civil War. So that involved more of the free slaves. And I finally figured out from this reading where the title African American Methodist Episcopal Church comes from, because they're still around. And I've always looked at that American Methodist Episcopal Church as, what are they talking about? But the Episcopal part is just the fact that it was founded in London, in Great Britain, and it is the spreading of the Methodist word by these people that came in on horseback and just spread it around. Eventually, all these little sects got together and became the Methodist Church in the USA.
Well, interestingly too, I read where Charles remained Church of England all the way until
right,
he died.
did.
You know,
Yes.
they weren't really interested in it being called Methodism.
Right.
They were part of the Church of England, but they just wanted to be, they wanted to be self-studiers.
That's right.
And so
it was almost like this is how we want to practice.
And yeah, I think they sought for the Church of England to embrace that idea more.
Yeah, but you're right. I forgot about the fact that
Right.
he actually asked to be buried in, an affiliated.
Well, I believe he was,
church.
wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, they weren't rebels especially.
Oh, no.
They were just kind of like enrichment people.
Very.
Very
So-
much enrichment people.
So one of his best known hymns, although there are many, it's hard to say which is the best known, but one that has gone across denominations and just appears in pretty much every hymn book everywhere, is "O for a Thousand Tongues to Speak." And it's or "O for a Thousand Tongues
to sing.
to sing." Excuse me. Yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah, and that phrase comes from his friend Peter Bowler.
That's right.
He was inspired to write the hymn, and apparently this happened. He was inspired to write the poem after Peter Bowler talked to him and asked, and Wesley asked him about praising Christ, and Bowler replied, "Had I 1,000 tongues, I would praise him with them all."
That's exactly
So this
right.
was a very religious man, Peter Bowler.
Yep.
So he, on the anniversary of his own conversion, Charles Wesley wrote this hymn, which originally had 18 stanzas,
Yes.
of which we normally use 6 or 7, and I believe it's the 7th verse
That's right.
that has the "Oh, for a thousand tongues" text that we all, "Oh, for a thousand tongues to sing my dear Redeemer's praise, the glories of my God and King, the triumph of his grace." So that famous stanza was actually not the beginning, but it was buried pretty far into the poem. And the stanzas that sort of follow that originally seventh verse are basically the ones we still use in many of the hymn books. But the stanzas, the 18 stanzas, are what I was talking about earlier. They encompass all of Christian life and all the aspects, baptism, love, the Holy Ghost, all the different aspects that we think of.
I know, it's really,
Yeah.
he was so inspired. It's inspiring because his faith was so deep. So I see that in all of his hymns. And he wrote, he wrote "Christ the Lord is risen today." He wrote something for Easter.
Hark the Herald.
Hark the Herald Angels sing. He wrote something for Christmas. I mean, as we go through the church year,
I'm sure we'll do others of his hymns. This is actually the first one we've done that he wrote. He was not the inventor of the melodies that we've come to associate with his hymns.
Right.
This one, the hymn tune that we most closely associate with it, that's been used by many, many hymn books, is the melody written by a composer named Carl Glaser.
Right.
And his middle name is Goldhilf, with the two dots over the O. So
good.
Probably German.
Yeah.
There's not a lot about him. His claim to fame is that he wrote this tune, this one tune.
Good for him. I'm glad.
Yeah, and Lowell Mason, our friend from a few chats ago, is credited for arranging the melody and harmonizing it.
Yep.
So the hymn tune that I'm talking about is this one that is so famous. And so many people watching this chat would know that hymn tune. It is interesting to note that there have been other hymn tunes that were used to express this text. And I was showing Barbara this one earlier from the service book in hymn book. The old red hymn book had two 04,000 tones. And this one, it's number 428 in the old red book. And the first one went like this. This is by a composer named William Gardner, 1770 to 1853. So he was back in that older time too, but a little bit later. And his one, somebody who grew up with that hymn book, I don't know that tune at all.
No.
So we must have used the other one.
Yeah, I've always used the other
Yes, yes.
Good
So,
old Lowell Mason, he knew how to write it.
and Lowell, he gave it the title Azmon, A-Z-M-O-N. You know, all these hymn tunes, we looked them up by their first lines, the better known first lines, but they all have names that these composers gave them. Sometimes they're cities, a lot of times they're cities, but they could just reference anything from the time period. And in this case, Azmon was the name he gave to it. Azmon is a city south of Canaan that's mentioned in Numbers, the 34th chapter. You know, we don't really know why he chose that. You know, sometimes the names of these hymns don't seem to have much to do with the hymn themselves.
Yeah, I imagine they had a lot of them and they just had to identify them somehow. So
Right.
I know that he was used to putting kind of obscure names on his hymns.
Yeah, I looked up the word Azmon, and you know, we know it's the city. And one reference said it means bone of a bone, our strength. So perhaps it had some meaning. You know, he thought maybe it's a strong hymn and this would be a good name for it. Who knows?
Yep.
We don't really know. We'll never know. Anyway, I feel like the text, of course, is wonderful and great. We've already talked about the reasons. It encompasses all of, you know, Christianity. But I also think that it's found life because of Lowell Mason's,
that melody.
well, really, Glaser's melody and the nice harmonization that Mason gave it. It has a driving rhythm, repetitive rhythm. That tee-tee-ta-ta rhythm just makes it go.
Right.
And I also love the melodic interval of a fourth. This Here Comes the Bride. Descends down. There it is again. So it sort of begins with that fourth and it sort of ends with that fourth. And
Feels good.
yeah, it has a descending triad there in the middle at the peak of the hymn, the high part. And I think that really, you know, we talked about the merger of words and lyric. The first rendition didn't do it justice, I don't think. I don't, it's not very memorable.
It's kind of milquetoasty.
Yeah, and yet this one's so fun to sing, and the words just go with it so well. So, anything else we want to say before we sing it?
No, I think that we've kind of covered it. I'm always amazed at the interesting things we find out about these composers and lyricists and hymn writers. It might make us all take a little moment and look at the bottom of the hymn to see who wrote this.
Absolutely.
Where did this melody come from?
Just kind of wrapping up the idea of his embodiment of the Christian faith through his music. It says here, it has been said that Wesley's hymns clothed Christ in flesh and blood and gave converts a belief that they could easily grasp, embrace with personal faith, and if necessary, even die for. So,
good stuff.
Yeah, good stuff. And
very inspired.
Yeah.
Writer.
Wonderful lyric, and so I'll say, if you're interested in seeing the entire hymn, you can Google "O 4,000 Tongues," and you can certainly see all 18 verses and kind of get the whole story. I believe Barbara's going to sing. Let's see how many are in our current hymn book. Our newer Lutheran hymn book has 6, and of course number 1 is "O 4,000 Tongues to Sing." Do you want to sing all 6, or do you want to?
How about if I do 1, 3, and 5, maybe?
All right.
Just so we hear a little bit of how it progresses.
Sounds good. So we are going to use the old key was A flat for those that know what key signatures are. The new key is G, if you care.
So we are going to sing some of the verses for you, and after looking at them, we made a little change. We're in our hymnal, it's number 886, and we decided
in the new hymn book.
In the new hymn book, and we decided to do the first, second, and last verse. So 1, 2, and 6.
Yeah.
Because they kind of relate to what we were talking about.
Well, and also we discussed the first verse was his 7th verse.
That's right.
But his first verse is now our 6th verse. So we're going to end. She'll actually sing the lyric to what would have been the start of his long 18 verse thing. So, all right. So 1, 2, and 6. If you're following along in the hymn books at home. Thanks, Barbara.
Sure.
I love that hymn, always have. So hopefully for everyone listening that made it this far through the video, when you hear that tune in the future and those words, you'll think of Charles Wesley and
his profound faith.
Absolutely brings more meaning to these hymns when we know a little bit about where they came from.
Absolutely.
So we'll see you next time on the Music Chat.
Bye.